On the 20th of August 1968, 2,000 tanks and 500,000 troops rolled in to Czechoslovakia. Curiously, however, these invading states were not Czechoslovakia's enemies. They were in fact fellow members of the Soviet-led Warsaw Pact. So how did Czechoslovakia prompt such an extreme reaction from the Soviet Union and its surrounding communist neighbours? This tragic and often forgotten piece of Eastern European history begins with the election of a new Czechoslovakian leader, Alexander Dubcek. As a young man, Dubček had taken part in anti-Nazi resistance during World War II. Later, he graduated in law and made progress in the Czechoslovakian Communist Party, and by the 1960s, he was an important leader. Dubček was elected first secretary of the Communist Party in January 1968. Dubček replaced Antonin Novotny. Novotny was a Stalinist communist who had survived a German concentration camp and had taken a leading role in the communist takeover of Czechoslovakia in 1948, gaining the presidency in 1964. However, Novotny's close cooperation with Moscow went against the growing calls for internal reform within Czechoslovakia itself. When Novotny became unpopular and was forced to resign in early 1968, Dubček took over control. From his election in January 1968, Alexander Dubcek brought a period of liberalisation reform known as the Prague Spring. Dubček tried to create socialism with a human face, and his radical reforms included greater freedoms for the media, greater freedom of speech, and a commitment to the democratization of the government. This would also include greater autonomy for Slovakia and the removal of travel restrictions for those who wish to move outside the Iron Curtain. Dubček did not seek to weaken communism. He sought to strengthen it by giving it more popular support. His reform manifesto was titled Czechoslovakia's Road to Socialism. In July 1968, he stated his commitment to both the Warsaw Pact and socialism. Despite the new leader of Czechoslovakia claiming loyalty to the Warsaw Pact, hardliners were fearful of the reform weakening the centralist government of both Czechoslovakia and the Eastern Bloc. Other communist leaders feared that the reforms would undermine their own positions, where centralized control through police surveillance and press censorship were long-standing norms. Of particular concern to Brezhnev, the Soviet leader, was Dubček's reforms were also supported by Romania and Yugoslavia. These reforms could spread and might undermine solidarity in the Eastern Bloc and their broader fight during the Cold War. Thus, the Soviets deemed it necessary to reverse these reforms with overwhelming military might, if necessary. The Soviet Union, along with other Warsaw Pact countries, mobilized an army of 500,000 troops and 2,000 tanks, which invaded on the 20th of August 1968. The countries occupying included the Soviet Union, Hungary, Poland, and Bulgaria. East German troops were also ready to invade, but were stood down at the last moment. Around 137 Czechoslovakians were killed, and many more were injured. There was active resistance for 8 months, with curfews being breached, street signs sabotaged, and several protest suicides. For instance, 8 protesters held a sit-down peaceful protest in Red Square on the 25th of August, but were quickly removed by the KGB and were later convicted and sent to prison, exile, or prison psychiatric units. Dubček was taken to Moscow for questioning. He returned to Prague a week later and stayed in power. However, after several months, he was forced to resign. The invasion was condemned by the West as well as other communist states. There were strong protests through the United Nations seeking to condemn the invasion, but the USSR exercised its power of veto. Albania, whose relations with the Soviet Union were already on the rocks, removed itself from the Warsaw Pact and began developing stronger relations with the People's Republic of China. The subordination of Eastern Bloc national interests to those in Moscow became known as the Brezhnev Doctrine. The centralist control from Moscow was condemned by China, as the Brezhnev Doctrine allowed one communist country to decide the form of communism within another state. A similar reaction was seen from Yugoslavia and Romania, communist nations with shaky relations with the Soviet Union. Just days before the invasion, Yugoslavian leader Tito had visited Czechoslovakia, stating that he believes that the Soviet leaders are not such short-sighted people who would pursue a policy of force to resolve the internal affairs of Czechoslovakia. After the invasion, Yugoslavia became the primary gateway for Czechoslovakians escaping to the west. The Romanian response was even bolder. Nicolae Ceausescu, the General Secretary of the Romanian Communist Party, denounced the invasion to a crowd of 100,000 people. He declared that it was a grave error and constituted a serious danger to peace in Europe and for the prospects of world socialism. He even went so far as to suggest that the Romanian people should take up arms against any invading Soviet-led force. Ceausescu experienced a huge wave of popularity, both at home and abroad. However, he did not follow in Dubček's reformist footsteps, transforming Romania into a totalitarian state. This would ultimately result in his overthrow and execution by a firing squad, a topic we will be exploring in more depth in the coming weeks. International relations with the West deteriorated following the invasion, and both the East and the West continued to build and stockpile nuclear weapons as the Cold War continued. However, the USA did not support any military intervention in Czechoslovakia, seeing the events as an internal matter beyond the Iron Curtain. Gustav Husak, a hardline communist, replaced Dubček in April 1969 and reversed the liberalisation reforms. This period of reversal included increased censorship and centralisation as part of a policy of normalization. Dubček was given a job as a forestry official with no political gravity. Some time passed and events moved on significantly. The political map of Europe changed yet again. Dubček's contribution to reform was eventually recognised. In 1989, following the Velvet Revolution and the collapse of the communist regime, Dubček became the chairman of the Federal Assembly under the Havel administration. During his life, he witnessed the defeat of the Nazis, the ascent of communism, the emergence of NATO and the Warsaw Pact, détente, and the Velvet Revolution. Whilst his efforts to reform were harshly suppressed in 1968, his influence endured and ultimately formed a part of the reform of the USSR itself. In 1987, the Soviet Premier Gorbachev moved firmly towards a reform agenda. Through glasnost and perestroika, he confirmed that he had been influenced by Dubček's reforms. Which topics would you like us to cover next? Leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.